Okay, let's unpack this then. Welcome back, everyone, to the deep dive.
Hello.
Today, we are really getting into something quite fundamental, cleanliness. We're doing a deep dive into the story of India's huge nationwide cleanliness mission, the Swachh Bharat mission.
Yeah, and we've got, well, quite a stack of material here. Reports, analyses, surveys,
Yeah.
all looking back at, gosh, over a decade of this massive effort.
Right. So our mission for this dive is really to cut through some of the noise, understand the sheer ambition behind it, see where it really succeeded.
And also where it didn't quite hit the mark. Those stubborn challenges that the sources show still remain.
Exactly. We want to get a clear picture, based on this material, of India's really complex journey towards cleanliness.
Because it becomes pretty clear pretty quickly when you read through this stuff. It's not a simple story, not just success, not just failure. It's really nuanced.
Definitely see some bright spots, undeniable progress in areas.
But also, yeah, plenty of dirt, let's say.
Yeah.
Difficult realities that still need tackling.
It's definitely not straightforward. Okay, let's dive in.
So the launch itself, October 2nd, 2014. That was quite the moment.
Oh, absolutely. Prime Minister Modi, broom in hand, right there on Rajpath in New Delhi. A very visible kickoff.
And the scale of the ambition was just enormous. It wasn't pitched as just, building infrastructure.
No, it was framed as a Jan Andolan, right? A people's movement.
Exactly. The goal, make India clean and, crucially, open defecation-free ODF by Mahatma Gandhi's 150th birth anniversary in 2019.
That connection to Gandhi was powerful. Didn't he reportedly carry his own portable toilet sometimes? It really tapped into that symbolism.
It really did, and the stated goals were huge. Millions of toilets, yes, but also eradicating manual scavenging, changing public behavior, that whole mindset shift.
That mantra, na gandagi karange, na karna dange, we won't litter nor let others litter. It seemed to catch on, didn't it?
It did seem to capture the imagination initially. You saw images everywhere.
Politicians, celebrities, school kids, everyone seemed to be doing cleanup drives at the start. And the government really backed it financially, according to the sources.
Oh, yes. The initial commitment was serious. We saw figures like 28 billion allocated early on.
And those incentives for families?
Right. 12,000 for rural families to build their own toilets, plus big external support, like a $1.5 billion loan from the World Bank.
So fast forward to 2019, and the official declaration comes, India is ODF. Mission accomplished, seemingly.
That was the headline. And the numbers behind it were, well, staggering.
Over 100 million toilets built. Almost 600,000 villages declared ODF.
And you had major international bodies like UNICEF highlighting it, calling it a global sanitation success, linking it to drops in diarrheal deaths.
Looking purely at those top-line figures, it really does sound like an almost unbelievable transformation in just 5 years.
They are dazzling numbers, no doubt. That image of the PM with the broom seemed, symbolic of real change.
I sense a but coming.
Well, this is where digging into the material gets really fascinating, because those declarations, those headlines, they're just the surface. The reality on the ground, according to many of these analyses, is it's a lot more complicated.
Okay, let's peel back that layer then, because the sheer number of toilets built is undeniable. We're talking over 120 million reported, right?
Yes, the construction push was immense. Rural sanitation coverage figures jumped dramatically from maybe 38% in 2014 to a claimed 100% by 2019.
And urban areas saw a lot of activity, too. Public toilets, local bodies declared ODF.
Millions of public toilets added. Thousands of urban local bodies declared ODF. And the data does generally back up a significant reduction in open defecation compared to, say, the early 2000s. Fewer households lacking any facility at all.
And the health impacts mentioned are significant. Studies linking higher toilet coverage in districts to lower infant mortality.
Yeah, reduced under 5 mortality, too. That UNICEF analysis suggested potentially tens of thousands of children's lives saved each year, curbing diseases like diarrhea.
There was even an economic angle reported, right? Families in ODF villages saving money on health costs.
Exactly. So when you gather those specific data points and impacts, it really paints a picture of remarkable progress, a shift from being infamous for open defecation to setting some kind of example.
It genuinely sounds like mission accomplished on the primary goal. But, and here comes the tricky part we found in the sources. Building toilets is one thing.
Getting people to use them consistently.
Making sure they stay clean, functional, have water.
That's the much, much tougher challenge. And this is where that phrase, the duty truth, starts appearing in the material.
Right, because despite that 100% ODF declaration, there's this persistent issue of toilets built but not actually used, or not usable.
Precisely. The sources point to facilities, especially in rural areas, becoming non-functional, damaged, sometimes even used for storage. Yet they're still counted in the official tallies.
I remember reading about parliamentary committees noting that even in villages declared ODF, if people revert because the toilets aren't working, the declaration is kind of, well, meaningless on the ground.
Exactly. And the reasons are varied. Water supply is a big one. Consistent water is essential.
Poor construction quality, maybe? Leading to quick disrepair?
That's mentioned too. And then there are the deeper cultural habits, ingrained preferences. For some communities, using an indoor toilet structure just isn't the norm or feels uncomfortable, infrastructure or not.
And what about the public toilets in cities? The descriptions sounded pretty grim sometimes.
Oh, absolutely. That survey data you mentioned earlier, finding over half were barely functional. And a significant number so bad, people just wouldn't use them.
It paints a picture of people needing public facilities, but often opting for paid ones if available, and even those aren't always up to scratch.
It really highlights a major gap, particularly in urban areas. Millions built, yes, but the ongoing maintenance piece, it seems largely missing, rendering many unusable. Kind of defeats the purpose.
And then there's the whole issue of waste beyond toilets, solid waste management. The sources talk about cities just drowning in trash.
Yeah, those images of Delhi's garbage mountains are striking examples, but the analyses suggest it's a widespread issue. Broken infrastructure, overflowing landfills.
Open drains basically acting as garbage chutes.
And while there's been improvement in waste processing, the figures suggest it jumped from around 20% in 2014 to maybe 70% more recently.
That's still a long way from 100%.
A very long way. And our rivers. The descriptions are stark. Grand sewage carriers, even major rivers like the Ganga, despite high-profile cleanup efforts, showing little significant improvement in water quality, according to the reports.
Which brings us to funding. The sources suggest it's become a bit inconsistent, particularly for the long haul.
It seems so. SBM Urban 2.0, the second phase for cities, has a big new allocation, which is positive. But funding for some rural parts seems to have decreased.
And crucially, what about the money for changing behavior? The IEC, information, education, communication.
That's a key point. Raised resources specifically for IEC activities have also reportedly declined. And that's the stuff needed to drive and sustain the behavioral change.
It definitely raises questions about long-term strategy and funding allocation, especially when, basic things like clean air and water in cities are still daily struggles.
Right. And the whole smart cities idea. The analysis suggests the reality often doesn't match the glossy vision, still battling basic waste collection and governance issues.
That comparison in one source about giving an Oscar to a B movie for effort, pretty sharp commentary on the gap between labels and reality.
It certainly underscores that point, yeah. Rankings and labels don't always capture the lived experience.
So beyond the physical stuff, the toilets, the waste, the money, there's this deeper cultural layer the sources kept coming back to, this cultural conundrum.
Absolutely. It's fascinating, this paradox highlighted in the material. A culture often deeply focused on personal purity, yet grappling immensely with public cleanliness. Streets, public spaces.
It's framed as not just an infrastructure problem, but something deeper, culturally ingrained. Historical observations are even mentioned, alongside modern examples.
And maybe, the sources suggest, some of the strong reactions you see online to videos showing uncleanliness. Maybe part of that defensiveness comes from recognizing an uncomfortable truth.
The mission did try to tackle this directly, though, with the big campaigns, the PM's involvement.
It absolutely did. And it undeniably sparked a national conversation like maybe never before. Millions did participate in those early drives. You hear stories, anecdotes.
Kids telling adults not to litter, people thinking twice about dropping wrappers.
Right. But behavioral change is it's slow, it's really complex. It needs constant, sustained reinforcement.
So that reported drop in funding for the IEC work, that makes it much harder to keep the momentum going, to really embed that cultural shift.
Exactly. It potentially undermines a long-term goal.
Yeah. Now, okay, we've talked a lot about the challenges, the critiques, but it's really important, as the sources emphasize, to acknowledge the genuine successes, the blight spots.
Definitely. Because despite the hurdles, there were significant wins. You can't ignore them.
That massive increase in toilet access itself, getting over 82% of households covered by 2019-21, that's a huge leap.
Monumental by any global standard.
Yeah.
And it wasn't just a number. It had real positive effects, especially noted for women, increased safety, dignity.
And the child health impacts we mentioned earlier, those are tangible benefits.
Absolutely. And the behavioral shift, even if incomplete, making sanitation a mainstream topic, something people actually talked about, that is a major achievement in itself.
That cultural taboo was challenged. Those small examples, kids correcting elders, people being more conscious, they might seem small, but they signal a real shift in awareness.
It also pushed the idea of waste as a resource, elements of a circular economy. And it created jobs construction, yes, but also ongoing roles for those sanitation volunteers, the Swachh Bharat.
And the international recognition was genuine. Building that many toilets that quickly, it was noticed globally. Gates Foundation, UN, they did give accolades.
Right. And importantly, there is a phase 2. It started in 2020.
Focused on sustaining ODF status, but also tackling waste management more seriously.
Yes, solid and liquid waste management is a big focus now. Plus, new initiatives like ratings for tourist spots, new institutes for innovation. The framework for continuing and improving is there.
So it's not like the effort just stopped in 2019.
Not at all. The structure exists to address the shortcomings identified.
So the path forward based on this material seems less about, tearing it all down and starting again.
No, much more about building on the foundation. Critically addressing the gaps, usage, maintenance, the wider waste issue, while acknowledging the initial massive push.
That half-baked cake analogy from one source feels quite apt, doesn't it?
It really does. Looks impressive, structure's there, but the inside needs more time, more attention, more heat, I suppose. Functionality, sustainability, true cleanliness.
So key recommendations seem to be shifting focus. Less on just building, more on maintenance and actual use.
Prioritizing that, yes. And heavy, consistent investment in waste segregation, processing infrastructure.
And crucially, sustained funding for those behavior change campaigns. Not letting that fade.
Especially in difficult rural contexts. And fundamentally tackling the state of rivers, drainage, that requires stricter rules, better enforcement, big investments in treatment.
It needs to move beyond a campaign mentality, right?
Yeah.
To become just normal, sustained civic responsibility.
Deep community engagement is key for that.
It was undeniably bold,
Yeah.
ambitious. And this deep dive shows it achieved remarkable things, that initial infrastructure push sparking the conversation.
Huge achievements there.
But it also really laid bare how difficult it is to translate those structures and that initial awareness into deep, lasting change. Systemic change, behavioral change.
It's a complex picture, definitely. Incredible progress markers side by side with these frustrating realities of implementation and keeping it going.
So hopefully this deep dive has given you, our listeners, a clearer, maybe more nuanced view of what was and is a vital national effort. Maybe some aha moments about what worked, what didn't, based on the sources we looked through.
Because we've seen that data, massive strides in toilet access, a real shift in the national conversation. That's undeniable.
Yet these challenges, consistent use, proper maintenance, handling all the other waste, they're still huge roadblocks.
They really are.
So here's something to mull over as we wrap up. If changing the physical infrastructure and sparking that initial wave of awareness aren't quite enough on their own, what does it really take, perhaps on a much deeper cultural community level, to bridge that final gap? The gap between having the facilities and achieving a nation that is consistently, truly, and holistically clean.